When I opened the door that night, the smell of blood hit me before I saw it. It wasn't strong at first, just a metallic whisper under the scent of rain-soaked wood. But it was enough to stop me cold. The house was silent. No TV, no music, not even the hum of the fridge. Just that silence that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break it. I remember thinking how dark the hallway was. One light flickered in the living room, throwing long, nervous shadows across the walls. The air felt heavier than it should have, like grief had been living there for hours before I arrived. Then I heard it. A sound so small I almost missed it. A sob. A single broken sob from the other side of the room. "Linda?" I called out. My voice didn't sound like mine. It cracked somewhere between fear and disbelief. I stepped closer. My boots stuck to the tile. Something wet beneath them. I looked down. Red. A streak of it. My heart stumbled. When I turned the corner, the world stopped moving. She was on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in trembling hands. My wife, the woman who once laughed loud enough to shake the windows, was now shaking like a leaf in winter. Her hair was wet, her eyes swollen, and the sound that came from her wasn't crying anymore. It was something deeper, something human only makes when it's seen too much. And behind her, my son. He stood there frozen, barefoot, shirt half torn, breathing hard like he'd run miles. His hands, his hands, were covered in blood. Not his. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with eyes that didn't belong to the boy I raised. I didn't yell. I didn't ask what happened. There are moments when words mean nothing. This was one of them. I looked from my wife to my son, then back to the floor. The blood wasn't just around them. It moved. A thin trail of red crawling away from their feet, slipping into the dark hallway like it was trying to escape. I followed it with my eyes. A slow, trembling line that disappeared into the back door, half open, swinging gently in the wind. For a moment, the world narrowed down to one sound, the steady drip, drip, drip of blood falling from his fingers. My wife lifted her head, tears streaking through the mess on her face. Her lips trembled as she whispered something I'll never forget. I tried to stop it. Her voice cracked. "He didn't mean to." I raised my hand to silence her. Not because I didn't want to hear, but because I already knew. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't an accident. The air told me, the blood told me, the silence told me. I walked past them, one step at a time, following the trail toward the back of the house. My son's voice shook behind me. "Dad, don't go out there." But I didn't stop. Fathers don't stop when the world turns red. Each step echoed louder than the last, until the light faded and the wind slipped through the open door like a whisper from hell itself. I took a breath, staring into the darkness outside. The smell of iron was stronger now, thicker. And then I saw it, just enough to know that whatever waited out there wasn't done yet. Because the blood didn't end at the door, it started there. And what I found at the end of that trail will change the way you see justice forever. Before that night, we looked like every other family on the block. A white house with a porch swing. Roses my wife kept alive no matter how cold the winter got. A flag that never touched the ground. From the outside, you'd think we had it figured out. The American picture framed in Sunday morning light. I used to be a cop. 15 years in the force before I realized justice and truth weren't always the same thing. After a case went sideways, I took early retirement and started fixing things. Plumbing, fences, broken doors, It was quieter work, honest work. My wife said it made me softer. Maybe she was right. Linda, she was the steady one. A school counselor, the kind of woman who believed people could be saved if you just listened long enough. She carried the weight of other people's pain like it was her duty. And for years, I thought she carried mine too. Our son Michael was the light in that house. Sharp, curious, stubborn in the way young men are before life teaches them humility. I taught him to ride a bike on that same cracked driveway. Taught him how to throw a punch without losing his temper. I told him once, "You don't win by fighting, you win by staying in control." He used to nod like he understood. But somewhere along the way, the nod stopped, meaning yes. It began when he went off to college. He came back different. New clothes, new friends, a voice that carried the kind of confidence you don't earn, you buy. He stopped coming home for holidays. When he did, he'd scroll through his phone at dinner, half listening, half somewhere else. I'd ask about his job, his classes, his future. He'd smile that small, polite smile and say, "I'm working on something big, Dad. You wouldn't understand." He was right. I didn't. But not because I couldn't, because he didn't want me to. Linda noticed before I did. She'd stay up late, waiting for his calls. Some nights I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, staring at nothing, fingers tracing the rim of a cold coffee cup. One night I heard the sound of running water long after midnight. I went to check and found her sitting on the bathroom floor, the shower still on, steam fogging the mirror. Her shoulders shook quietly. "Linda," I whispered. She looked up, wiped her face, forced a smile that broke my heart. "Just tired," she said. But I could smell fear in that room, and the same kind I used to smell on crime scenes. She was hiding something, and I did what every man who's afraid of the truth does. I pretended not to notice. The distance in our house grew, invisible but heavy. The laughter that used to fill the walls turned into quiet conversations behind closed doors. Sometimes I'd walk in and both of them would stop talking. Linda would say, "It's nothing." But silence is never nothing. Silence is a story you're not ready to tell. One night, Michael came home late. His car door slammed harder than it should have. I waited in the dark until he stepped inside. There was a smell, cologne and something else, expensive and wrong. He froze when he saw me. "You've been drinking?" I asked. He smiled without warmth. "Not tonight." "Where were you?" "With people who actually matter," he said. Then he brushed past me like I was furniture. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was how easy they came to him. After that, I stopped trying to reach him. I convinced myself he'd grow out of it, like arrogance was just another phase. Linda kept believing. She always did. A week before it all happened, I got called out of town for a short job, a private security detail for an old friend. Nothing dangerous, just a few days away. The night before I left, Linda came to me. She looked exhausted, eyes glassy, lips pale. She took my hand and held it against her chest. "Tom," she said softly, "if something happens, promise me you won't lose control." I laughed then, a hollow, tired laugh. "Lose control? Honey, I'm too old for that." She didn't smile back. She just stared at me like she was memorizing my face. That's the thing about warnings. They never sound like warnings until it's too late. If I'd known what that promise would cost, I would have never made it. But that night, I did. And it's been haunting me ever since. Whose blood is that? I was was kneeling now, the tile cold through my jeans, my voice barely holding itself together. My wife didn't answer. She just stared at the wall, shaking her head, like she could erase what she'd seen. Michael stood a few feet away, pale, frozen, eyes locked somewhere beyond me. His face was blank, almost peaceful, like shock. A sock had hollowed him out from the inside. "Michael," I said again, softer this time. "Tell me whose blood that is." Nothing, not a blink, not a breath. That silence, it was louder than any scream. Then I noticed the way his fingers trembled, twitching like they wanted to reach for something and couldn't. His hands weren't just bloody, there were scratches on his wrists, deep and raw. Signs of a struggle? I followed his gaze to the back door, half open, the night wind whispering through it. Something told me I didn't want to look outside. But I've spent half my life walking into things I didn't want to see. I rose slowly, my boots leaving red prints across the kitchen floor. Each step toward that open door felt heavier, like I was wading through a memory I'd buried years ago. The air outside was colder than it should have been. The rain had stopped, but everything glistened. The grass, the concrete, the thin streak of blood that led across the patio. And then I saw him. A man lying on his back in the middle of the yard, his head turned to one side, his eyes open but seeing nothing. A dark pool spread beneath his skull, thick and glistening. I didn't need the porch light to know who he was. Richard Crane. Even dead, I'd recognize that smug, sculpted face. The same man who once smiled across an interrogation table while my career burned to ashes. 15 years ago, I'd built a case against him. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. He had the money, the lawyers, the friends in high places. I had the truth, but the truth doesn't buy headlines. When it all collapsed, he walked free and I lost everything that made me a cop. Now he was lying in my yard. I took a step closer, the earth sucking at my boots. The back of his head was caved in, skull split from a single blunt strike. Whoever did it knew exactly how to kill fast. Behind me, the door creaked. "Dad?" Michael's voice was raw, small. "Don't call anyone, please." I turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, his eyes glassy with tears he refused to let fall. "You killed him?" I asked. My words didn't sound like mine. They came out flat, mechanical. He shook his head once. "No, he came here. He wanted to talk. Things got bad. I tried to stop him." "Why was he here, Michael?" He hesitated, his jaw clenched. Then he said the words that dropped my stomach into the ground. "I worked for him." My brain went white. "You what?" "I didn't know who he really was at first," he said quickly. "He owned the firm. I thought it was just finance stuff, but it wasn't. Dad, he was—" "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare tell me you didn't know what kind of man he was." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet iron and something else. Guilt. I looked down at Richard's body again. There was no weapon nearby. No sign of forced entry, just him, the blood, and my family's fingerprints all over the scene. This wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this. I walked back inside. My hands were shaking now. The first instinct was still there. The old cop instinct, call it in, secure the scene, wait for backup. But as I reached for the phone, I saw Michael's face. Not anger, not defiance, just fear. Pure, childlike fear. "Don't, Dad, please," he said again. I froze. I'd seen that look before. Not in my son, but in witnesses, victims, people caught in something too big for them. That's when I knew. He wasn't lying, he'd been set up. I hung up the phone. The decision hit me like a confession. I was in it now, whatever it was. I started scanning the kitchen like I was back on a crime scene. The details came fast. The back window latch broken from the outside. One security camera smashed clean off. Wires dangling. The home phone lay in the sink, its cord severed. Water still dripping from the faucet. Someone had thrown it there deliberately, to kill the evidence. This wasn't just about Michael. Someone had been in my house before I got there. I crouched again beside Linda. She finally looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. He said he was here to make things right. Then everything went wrong. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew. I looked out the door one last time, rain beginning to fall again, washing away the edges of the blood trail. Richard Crane was dead, but I could feel it in my bones. He wasn't the only ghost walking through my home that night. And somewhere in the dark, whoever had started this wasn't done yet. They'd just chosen their battlefield. And it was my house. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The sound of rain against the windows kept time with the thoughts hammering in my head. Every drop reminded me of what was lying out there. Richard Crane, the man who'd ruined my life, now cold and silent in my yard. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I wasn't calling anyone, not yet. I waited until Linda fell asleep on the couch, her face pale and wet from hours of tears. Then I went outside, grabbed a tarp from the shed, and dragged Crane's body into the garage. The muscles in my back screamed, but I didn't stop. I wrapped him up tight, sealed the edges with duct tape, and pushed him behind the old workbench. The smell of oil and rust masked everything else, for now. Then I scrubbed the floors, every trace, every drop. My hands shook, but I kept moving. You'd be surprised how easy it is to fall back into old habits. Gloves, bleach, precision. Once a cop, always a cop. Even when you're cleaning up a murder scene in your own damn house. When the kitchen looked normal again, I sat down with Michael's phone. It was locked, of course, but I'd cracked worse. 10 minutes later, I was scrolling through his messages. Most were harmless, gendered texts to co-workers, friends, the kind of empty digital noise kids live in. But one thread caught my eye. A contact saved under the name R.C. Richard Crane. The messages were recent. We need to talk. Tonight. It's bigger than you think. You're already in. And the last one, sent an hour before I came home. Your father should have stayed retired. My chest went cold. Crane hadn't come here for Michael. He'd come for me. But why drag my son into it? I checked Michael's GPS history. His car had been at Crane's office almost every night for the past month. Long hours, late meetings, empty excuses. The address linked to a subsidiary, Dante Logistics. A name I hadn't heard in years, but one that sent a chill down my spine. Back when I was still on the force, Dante Logistics was rumored to be a front. Shell companies, offshore accounts, drug shipments hidden in cargo. I'd tried to prove it once. Crane had been the one to bury the evidence. Now it was back, and my son was standing in the middle of it. I sat there for a long time, staring at that name, feeling the past claw its way up my throat. Linda woke up sometime around noon. I told her we needed to talk. At first, she denied everything. Said she didn't know why Crane was there, didn't know about Michael's connection. But her hands gave her away. She kept twisting her wedding ring, eyes darting anywhere but mine. Linda, I said quietly, if you lie to me again, I'll know. She broke. The words spilled out between sobs. She'd met Crane years before I ever knew her, before the marriage, before Michael. He'd been her boss at a youth outreach program. She said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But he never let it go. When Crane found out Michael was her son, he used it. He sent her photos, old ones, grainy but enough to destroy her if they got out. He told her if she didn't convince Michael to cooperate with his business, he'd ruin us all. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. 15 years of marriage. And all this time she'd been living under that man's shadow. I wanted to hate her. God knows I tried, but all I felt was emptiness. So you knew, I whispered. You knew he was using our son. She shook her head, crying harder. I didn't think he'd get involved that deep. I thought he'd be safe. Safe? I laughed bitterly. There's no safe with men like Crane. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house felt smaller, the air heavier. Finally, I said it out loud. We're not victims anymore. We clean this up and we end it. She stared at me, terrified. Tom, what are you going to do? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know, not yet. But the part of me I thought I buried with my badge was awake again. That night, while Linda slept, I went next door to the Miller's place. They had one of those smart home security systems that caught everything on the block. I told them our dog had run off and asked to check their footage. They didn't ask questions. People never do when you wear a calm face. I loaded the footage onto a flash drive and brought it home. Back in the garage, under the hum of the old bulb, I watched it frame by frame. 9:27 p.m., Crane's black Mercedes pulled up to my driveway. He walked to the door alone. 9:39 p.m., the back porch light flickered. 9:42 p.m., movement. Someone leaving the side of the house. I zoomed in, and the figure was tall, broad-shouldered. He moved like he knew where the cameras were. His face was shadowed, but the jacket stopped my breath. Brown leather, same make, same cut, same wear marks on the collar as mine. Whoever he was, he'd been wearing my jacket. I replayed it twice, 3 times, just to be sure. The details didn't change. Someone wanted it to look like I had been there before the murder. Someone had planned this down to the blood on my floor. That's when the truth hit me. This wasn't random. Crane hadn't just shown up. He'd been led here. Led to die in my house. And someone out there was making sure the blame would fall exactly where they wanted it to. I sat there in the dark, the glow from the laptop flickering across my hands, realizing the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't call the police. The badge had taught me procedures, but it had also taught me something uglier. The law can be folded, bent, bought. If I handed Crane's body over to that system, the same hands that let him walk free 15 years ago would tuck this night away as another unsolved statistic. I'd watched justice die in courtrooms. I wasn't going to watch it die in my yard, too. So I buried him. Not with ceremony, but with a shovel and a silence that felt obscene. I wrapped him in the tarp, carried him behind the shed where the ground was soft, and dug until my fingers ached. I thought of all the men I'd put away, then of the one man who'd taken the shape of my ruin. I thought of the hollow space where my badge used to sit, the way people looked at you when your name came with a file. I set the last clump of earth on his chest and pressed it down with the heel of my boot, like I was closing a book I never wanted reopened. Then I started to hunt. The footage told me where to look. The jacket in the video led me to a warehouse on the edge of town, a dead building that used to house Crane's smaller operations. Inside, the smell of oil and old cigarettes clung to the beams. I found paperwork, invoices with shell company names, and a ledger with ink-stained numbers. One name appeared over and over: Vaughn Delaney. 20 years earlier, Vaughn Delaney had been a headline. I'd put him in cuffs once, arms slick with the kind of arrogance only men with money wear. He'd been charged with racketeering, assault, connection to contraband. He'd walked out of my courtroom on a technicality, smiling like he'd won something that night. My evidence had been compromised. His people had lawyers the size of houses. Delaney vanished into the kind of life that eats men who stick their hands into too many jars. He was exactly the sort of man who would make others bleed without getting his own hands dirty. Finding his name in Crane's books was confirmation. Delaney was the spider pulling strings. He had motive, means, and the kind of patience that smelled like rot. I knew how to pull patience apart. The plan was ugly and precise. We would use my son as bait, not as a murderer, not as a damned conspirator, but as a lure. Michael would be the vulnerability they underestimated. They'd think he was still a kid, the loose end they could manipulate. They wouldn't expect a father who'd once read people like open books. I told Michael a different truth. I told him to act like he was still involved, to be careless in public, to let his guard drop in places they watched. The idea sickened me, exposing my boy to their eyes. But vengeance rarely asks for cleanliness. It asked for results. Nights became reconnaissance. I drove the county in a truck with a cracked windshield, rain pelting the glass like static. I sat in the dark and watched people I'd once arrested walk the lanes like kings. I listened for names, followed cars, took notes in a small book I kept in my glove compartment. When I could, I recorded conversations, a snippet here, a barroom confession there, the raw admissions of men who thought themselves safe. One night at a diner off Route 7, I sat near a booth where two of Delaney's men argued about a missing shipment. I placed my recorder under a napkin dispenser and let the coffee go cold. The voice on the tape was a vulgar thing, but his words were gold. He accused Crane of moving too fast, of making mistakes that would get them noticed. He swore Delaney would handle it. Those words were all I needed: motive and direction. Back home, Linda watched me with terror she didn't bother disguising anymore. She begged me to stop. The pleading in her eyes was a guilt knife. She was the architect and the victim both, and every time she spoke my name, it sounded like a verdict. "Tom, please," she whispered one night, voice torn. "This isn't you. Don't drag yourself back into that world." I looked at her, at the woman who'd held our family together through years of quiet compromises, and I said what I'd promised I wouldn't. Not to break her, but because the truth had a new shape now, a cold, necessary curve. This time, I told her, my voice low and certain, justice won't be written on paper. She slid back on the couch like I'd slapped her, but she didn't try to stop me. Fear makes people small, and she was already small enough to disappear. Using Michael as bait wasn't simple theater. It was a slow, cruel choreography. I had him meet a courier in a parking lot, accidentally leave a USB in a public trash can, plant a call that a mutual contact could overhear. I let him look tired and distracted in the places Delaney's men favored. I let the camera catch him walking into a bar where deals were brokered over whiskey and laughter. It worked faster than I expected. The subtlety of it was beautiful in its own way. A glance here, a text there, a man showing up unannounced to clear things up. They approached him carefully at first, probing, testing. Then, once they believed he was weak, They started to move in. Every interaction I recorded, every slip, every flinch, every name. I compiled a case not for a courtroom, for a reckoning. I wanted confessions in their own voices, admissions that smelled of hubris and cheap cologne. I wanted them to confess like men who'd convinced themselves they were untouchable. Revenge, I'd learned, isn't catharsis. It's arithmetic. You count pieces, weigh risks, and pay attention to small things others ignore. The ledger in Crane's warehouse had been my ledger now. With each taped admission, with each man who cursed under his breath at Crane's absence, I felt something thaw inside me. Not peace, but an awful iron calm. Delaney was exposed, and when the trap closed, I would be ready to pull the last thread. What I didn't know yet was how many lives the final pull would unravel. It ended where it began, in the rain. Delaney sat across from me, bound to a chair in the same warehouse where Crane's empire once hid behind freight containers and fake invoices. The storm outside rattled the walls, wind cutting through the cracks, like the hiss of a ghost. He looked older now, but still wore that same grin, the one I remembered from 20 years ago when the cuffs clicked around his wrists. He'd smiled then, too. He always smiled when he thought he'd already won. "You think you're the first man who wanted me dead?" he said, voice calm, rich. The kind of tone you only get from a lifetime of stepping on people. "Tom, you never understood how this world works. It eats good men first." I didn't answer, just turned on the recorder and placed it on the table between us. He glanced at it, laughed. "Still a cop, huh? Even now?" "I just want the truth," I said quietly. He leaned forward. "Truth? Fine, you deserve that much." What came next cracked the last of the air out of my chest. He told me my son had called him. Michael had asked for a meeting that night, desperate, scared, trying to find a way out. He wanted Delaney to help get Crane off their backs, to stop the blackmail, to make the photos disappear. But Delaney saw an opportunity instead. He told Crane about it, told him to go reason with the boy. Then things spiraled. Crane showed up angry, drunk on power and ego. He pushed too hard. Michael fought back. The blunt object, the wrench probably, had been meant to scare him, not kill him. But anger doesn't always know its own strength. Delaney smiled, savoring every word. "Your boy didn't mean to do it," he said. "But he did, and I just made sure the scene told a different story. Clean, poetic, isn't it? Crane dies in your house, your prints on the record, the whole thing wrapped in a bow." I felt the floor tilt under me. He leaned back, eyes gleaming. "You and I aren't that different, Tom. We both lost faith in the system. You buried your badge. I buried my conscience. Difference is I made peace with it." I didn't remember pulling the trigger. The sound was flat, sharp, a sound I hadn't heard in 15 years. But my body remembered the rhythm. One bullet through the chest. He didn't even look surprised. The blood bloomed across his shirt, dark and fast. He coughed once, then smiled again, lips red. "Like father," he whispered, "like son." When it was done, I turned off the recorder, pocketed the tape, and walked out into the storm. The rain hit hard, soaking through my jacket as I drove home. My hands on the wheel were steady, but something inside me had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you've crossed every line you ever drew for yourself. When I turned onto my street, I saw the flashing lights before the house. Red and blue, bleeding into the night. Linda stood on the porch, wrists cuffed, her face streaked with tears and rain. 2 officers guided her toward a cruiser. She met my eyes, no fear, no shame, just a kind of tired peace. I told them everything, she said, her voice breaking through the thunder. You don't have to carry it anymore. I tried to speak, but the words stuck. Michael sat in another car, hands folded, head down. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine through the glass. Empty, hollow. The same eyes I'd seen in the mirror at 25 after I'd lost my badge. The eyes of a man who just learned what justice really costs. The officer closed the door, and the sound of it was final, like a book snapping shut. I stood there in the rain, watching the tail lights disappear down the road. The house behind me, flickering with the ghosts of everything I'd buried. They say revenge ends when blood is paid. But in my family, blood never stops calling.